So what the experimenters did this time was they turned that big pot of boiling water up 1 degree at a time until slowly, finally, that water hit boiling point again. What do you think the frog did this time? The frog kept swimming. It adapted to its situation. And that is what I think happened. You know, in what way, in what areas of your life and people listening are they a boiling frog right now? Because as humans, our number one fear is rejection. There's a very different thing between anxiety and a social phobia, and I think it's quite liberating when you know that. Anxiety is incredibly specific. It's a very specific point or thing. Social phobia is something a bit more generalised, but it's inherently about humiliation. People listening to this will be like, oh, but I haven't had trauma. Let me tell you, yes, you have. And trauma is also something that you have witnessed. Quite often, it doesn't have to be something that happened to you directly. But trauma creates an underlying limiting belief about yourself based on shame that you take into your system, and the only cure is self-compassion.
Annalie, welcome to the Open Up podcast.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Oh, honestly, I'm so excited. You're also like my first guest of today. So we're recording a few episodes. I mean, I always say this to every guest, right? Of course, I'm excited to have you on. I'm very picky about who I want to sit on the couch with. But also, you don't know how I'm going to start. But I really, really want to start here. I've seen you do this before, heard you do this before. And this really, really impacted me. So this is where I want to start.
Mm-hmm.
You do this beautiful thing. You're probably going to explain it better than I am, especially when you're on stage, in terms of asking people, how are they? And not the superficial way that we are used to, like, fine, yeah, good. Or, oh, you know, I've been better. Or is it a bit of a tough day? Is actually, how are you? And we do a really deep check-in. So can you lead us with this exercise, please? And can we start there?
Yes, gladly. So yeah, it's how are you feeling? And you're not allowed to say good, fine, or okay, which is throwaway. So I will gladly start, and thank you for putting me on the spot. So let's do it. So how am I feeling? I feel a bit emotional today, in all honesty. I was traveling last week. I've got a bit of jet lag. I was out last night with wonderful friends, but I'm a bit low. I know I am energetically. So I feel a bit behind. So that's with me at the moment. There's a little bit of the good girl that I feel like I haven't been as good as I should have been. So that's definitely here because I know I'm low. So my inner critic's got my ear a little bit. I'm a single mum. My daughter's back today. So I'm here with you this morning, but sort of my ticking in the back of my head is mummy mode of things I need to make sure I can also get done. So that's around. I feel really excited to be here with you. I love doing something that's purposeful and engages me. So that's really exciting. And I feel like there's some really good sort of energy around at the minute. There's some nice opportunities coming in work-wise and things like that in my life. I sort of feel like there's a bit of a shift happening. So the answer is, I am really good, I'm fine and I'm okay. But I want to tell you honestly where I am, because it's really important that you know that. And the reason that we do that, actually I'm going to flip it onto you. So can you answer the same question, please? And it can't be good, fine or okay.
Okay, the fact that you can share that open and that level of vulnerability, I say vulnerability, is something that I still consciously have to work on. So I want to say thank you because it gives me full permission to share. So I am aware of how far I have pushed my body recently, and we are skating on thin ice. I massively feel overwhelmed but not stressed, and that's actually a calming feeling because the two together for me don't vibe. Having said that, I'm proud that I've been able to take one day at a time and be present in what and where I have showed up, which again is new for me. So I'm proud. I'm so proud of that. And I feel so grateful for today because whether it's podcasts, clients, my corporates, it's when I feel so alive. I think I'm consciously aware of how far I push my boundaries. And when you said you just being aware of like your energy is low and not where like, you know, it usually is or where you'd like it to be, I really feel that. And I think coming into today, I thought I would get a million things done before we start recording. And I had to release that expectation. So it's trusting myself that I'm okay. We're going to still produce a beautiful episode. I'm present. This literally lights my soul up. And I'm learning.
I love that. Thank you. So the reason that we do that, the reason that I do that, and anyone can take this into a team environment, a relationship, family systems, whatever it may be, even just yourself when you need to perform, right? We both know that today there's some vulnerability, and I think that's probably going to lend itself to what we're going to talk about even more. And it's the first time we physically met, but there's probably a deeper connection between us already, I would say. And then also, if we were being asked to do something, okay, we're performing by speaking, but if we were in a team and we needed to do something that our survival was dependent on it, we know that right now you and I are, as you say, we've got it, but it would be there's not loads in the tank. It's not going to be a marathon today. We could do some sprints, but we can't be doing a whole marathon. And that's really important, because if we were, say, working on a project together in a corporate, I'm going to drop the ball, honestly, at some point. I'm good till about 3:00 and then I'm probably going to crash. And maybe the same with you. Like you've got a lot of emotional energy right now. We both have. So we can get it done, but it's not going to be the highest quality or attention to detail. So if there's a really important deadline or something like that, we need to know that as a team to make sure that we're performing well. So all of this kind of, I'm fine. Yeah, I'm fine. I'm good. I'm okay. What it's doing is it's holding someone at arm's distance from vulnerability, which I know we're going to speak about a lot, but that's not helpful with performance. And when we used to live in communities and our survival was dependent, right? So, if I was in charge of going to get the firewood, for example, to keep the fire going, to cook the food, to stay warm and stay alive, that's not the best choice today. I should be like sort of around the cave doing some tidying and reorganizing or something like that. I'm being facetious, but we need to know where someone's at. Brene Brown does this beautiful thing where her and her husband check in the morning and they ask in percentages where you are that day. So it's amazing, right? So you can do it obviously with friends, with work, with teams. And she might be like, I'm feel really great. I slept, I exercised, I've whatever, eaten well. I'm 70%. And her husband might say, do you know what? I've been traveling loads, I'm suffering. I'm 30%. So she will that day take on some more of the tasks and take some things off his plate and vice versa. But she said, if they're both, because life happens, if they're both really low, what they do is they look at what they can strip out. What can we get rid of? Let's get a takeaway tonight. Let's cancel that thing. Let's, ask a friend to pick up the kids from school. What can we do, given that we're both low, to try and fill this back up? But rather than band-aiding over or this, just complete like, yeah, I'm fine. Yeah, I'm fine. And we're just pushing people away from knowing where we are. We're also it's not a good performance technique, and it's absolutely denying genuine connection. So that's why we do it.
I knew. I was like, I'm not telling you that this is how we're opening, because I just knew it was going to be such a powerful exercise, one, to experience together, but two, hopefully to listen and to watch as well. So I know that my brain always races when I have a guest on, because I get so insanely excited and I'm like, I want to cover this, this and this. Okay. I feel like before we get into vulnerability, let's kind of talk a little bit more around like the survival instinct and how we've evolved, because I think that's going to really set the scene for our conversation. And even when in your check-in, you talked about should and the good girl and what you should be doing. And you've touched on already like those primal instincts and why we're kind of conditioned or how we've evolved. So can you give us a little bit more background, first of all, in terms of like that survival instinct, how it used to serve us, where it doesn't now in the modern day, but where then those kind of shoulds then creep in?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, the shoulds and the survival, and I'm going to be quite stereotypical, but it's in service of sort of generally speaking messages for women and men. But I'm just pleased for everyone listening, I'm generalizing just for the sake of time and for the episode. So with the sort of the shoulding and the good girling is people pleasing fundamentally underneath it. And people do this in different guises, men and women, but it's to do with being accepted and connected. Because if I was, again, going back to our physiology hasn't updated for modern times, effectively, is sort of what's going on here. So we all need a bit of a software upgrade. We need the latest Apple iOS, whatever it is. We need the upgrade because we are operating in this very old physiology, and you can't fight it. This is just sort of what's inside us. So we get triggered by certain things. We're, the evolution, we may live in different times, if you like. Our hardware may be different, but the software is the same. This is how I try and look at it.
I love this analogy. Please, people take this analogy. I used to describe it as like your brain being a computer.
Yeah.
But I'm upgrading to your analogy. I love this.
We do live alone now. Like, I'm a single mother. I live alone with my daughter. We're fine. It's not dangerous to live separately to, how we might live. We can get food very often, thank goodness, where we live. There's different places we can get food from. We're never without, thank God for Deliveroo, all these sorts of things. So, we're not in the same sort of situation that we were. However, our body, our system will react and be triggered in the same way. So me people pleasing, shoulding, wanting to be fundamentally accepted and connected, that's because as humans, our number one fear is rejection. So death on this study ranked as number 7. Our own death. Rejection was 1. I think judgment was 2. The death of your own children was in there higher up, things like with loved ones, stuff like that. But the reason that rejection is the number 1 fear of humans is, again, dating back to these times that if we were in this community living again and you rejected me, if everyone here today rejected me and I was ostracized from the group, I was outside, I would die. That is certain death. And what a death. I'm outside of the group, of anything I knew, of the connection, food, water, all my basic needs were gone. There is no way I would survive, and it would be a pretty horrible demise. So this is what I mean by these triggering and this physiology is the biggest fear still kicks in. For me to be rejected means death. And so I obviously really don't want that. So how can I stay connected? Well, what I need to do is please other people and meet their needs. And then this is where the cycle comes in. And I know we're going to go on to my special subject, the inner critic and other things and vulnerability, but this is where this stuff kicks in, and the shoulding. Oh, I should do that because I want you to really like me, or I should say this because I want these people to buy this, or whatever it might be. Or, I shouldn't dress a certain way because I'm a mum at the school, or I shouldn't talk about this on a podcast because what will people think of me? And it's like, because I could be rejected from a group, and that then is like the psychological safety. And so for people in the workplace, I know you do a huge amount of work in corporate, and I do as well. People don't understand, but the CEO can be the chief energy officer. Because you've set the energy. I know that you speak about all of these things beautifully, and it's the psychological safety of your workforce. When someone's working for you in any team, their mortgage, their family, everything is dependent on you. So if you have a leader, a manager, anyone, and they're having an off day, or your body language is off, or clearly a meeting has not gone well, or a phone call, and you're picking that up, you're going to be triggered in the same way. Your psychological safety at work has been under threat in that moment. And we can't decipher between the two.
I want to say maybe 5 million things. Okay, let me strip it to 2. The first thing, I feel that understanding the physiology behind it and why, for me, and I really encourage this with my clients, like we're working on it, and it's been a really common theme lately as well, is okay, now we can understand that and understand that, okay, that's not necessarily something that we're trying to change, but where can the self-compassion come in? Like, how can we actually give ourselves grace? And I know that's going to lead into a lot of like around the vulnerability. So the other thing I really wanted to kind of full circle back to even your check-in as well. When we talk about CEOs or your corporate leaders or being in that environment, and you said as an example, Amira, if we had to work on a project today, we are both aware actually, because we've done this check-in of where our energy's at, and we know we're possibly going to drop the ball. And even as you said it, last Friday I dropped the ball with something that, and I had to really be careful. And I was proud that my shoulds didn't kick in, but they would have. They used to. And am I happy I dropped the ball? No, because it was a very un-Amira thing. But I still had to I now have the tool set and the ability to say, okay, I give myself grace. I know my energy's low. In the big scheme of things, did somebody die? Was it detrimental? Was I able to find a solution? Yeah, I was. Okay, cool, not my best move, but it hasn't actually impacted anything else detrimentally. And what I wish, right, even using the Brené Brown example with her husband and how they do that check-in. One, I'm taking that straight back to my partner. This is from a tomorrow morning thing. This is what we are doing. But also, I don't feel like we don't have that time to pause. We're not making enough time to pause to say, hey, wait, actually, what can we strip back? And it's the need to, and this is coming from a very deep place of experience of doing. And once I've got it in my diary, I've said, yes, I can't strip back. I can't actually say, could we do this another time? And even a friend said to me, Amira, I know we've got lunch on Sunday. Actually, like, I'm not good right now. Can we not do it? And I was like, yeah, that's not even a thing. And she's like, oh, I knew you'd understand. I was like, yeah, of course. I'd rather you tell me than we show up and you're not present or you can't be. And one thing I would love, like psychological safety, you don't know the background of this. I had this conversation with somebody else for their organization, and this is something they're really kind of strategizing, and they're at the very like beginning stages of it. But how powerful if there was some kind of element with your team where you're actually able to check in and actually, rather than having this expectation of having to do and perform at this level all day, every day, that actually we adjusted and we adapted. How differently would we feel as individuals?
Yeah, I think it's such a powerful thing. And, you know, fundamentally, if we're looking at performance, because as corporate entities, we need to make money, right? That's okay. It's not a dirty word. It's not like a, you know, so you want high performance, and that's okay as a demand from an organization. And so this is where actually utilizing this psychological safety, it's not a weakness. It's absolutely a strength. And it's so essential to do this, you know, because do you want to have a high performing team where everyone is working at a sustainable high performance level? Yes. Well, the only way to do that is to understand where we are. And then you can also meet your needs. Right, okay, do you know what? I am a bit low. What do we need? Let's go and get some good food. Today, eating like beige is not the best plan for us. Like, it might be very attractive to eat all the sugar because we're tired and we're low, but that's only going to give us, we know it's only going to give us little crashes and little boosts. So, right, let's make some good nutritional choices. What can we do? What's in our armory to help us perform at our best? Where can we strip back? So I'm having an early night tonight or whatever else it is. Who could take over the really essential task this afternoon in our team? Because honestly, you and I, maybe not the best choice right now because of the huge client tomorrow. So, and what happens? An incredible thing happens because somebody else next week will need our help and us to step in. And, you know, relationships, family systems, life, parenting, corporate, everybody. I mean, this is how the army operates. So the Navy SEALs operate. They understand exactly where someone is. They have to work there because you can't have someone in there on bravado alone going, oh, yeah, I'm fine. Send me in first. I mean, that is life or death. Yeah. So I think we need to really lean into this and learn from these incredibly high performing athletes, you know, people in the forces, whoever else it might be operating, and take that into corporate and see this as a huge strength. And it is the key to high performance.
I love that as well. And especially because I know that a lot of your clients sit in those areas and those industries and those arenas, so hearing it from you as well firsthand I think is so powerful. And it reminded me of what we kind of started talking about off camera in terms of how we both experienced corporate. So I'm going to share from my side first.
Yeah,
sure. Then I feel that you can take it wherever you want to take it. I know for me, I can now look back in hindsight and say it was the hugest part of my life where I wasn't authentically me. And at the time, I didn't even know that. And I got to a point, and I know lots of people would love to say, what's your big moment? Like, what changed your life? And for me, I don't have it. It was lots of little moments that slowly compounded. And now I can kind of identify those moments. But in the moment, I was just living it. And I made lots of little changes, and each thing had a knock-on impact. And there was definitely one period where I can definitely associate to, it was a numbness. And that for me was like, that's it. That's your tap out point, because you're so deeply on autopilot that there is no connection anywhere. And I think the scary thing was that nobody else was aware, because the facade versus how I felt on the inside couldn't have contrasted anymore. And I always try to be careful in terms of how I explain it, because I'm not blaming corporate for it. It was me. Like, they were my decisions, they were my choices, and that actually took a really long time to own. I chose to put myself in that environment. I chose, and okay, yes, it was also understanding my conditioning as well. So I would guess I wanted to hear about your experience in terms of like the authenticity. And I know that I felt I masqueraded for a really long time.
There's two things I want to share here. So I'm trying to decide which way to do it. So I'll tell you a little bit about me first, and then I really want to share something I think is just amazing. And every time I talk about it or I hear it, it really hits me. So extremely similar situation to yourself. I think I was approaching 30. It was with my future ex-husband, if that makes sense. And I can remember that very similarly to you, I had this great job. I was successful in inverted commas. I earned really good money. I had a good reputation, all those things, but I was ill. I mean, truly, I didn't know I would just be ill and didn't seem to know why. And I would cut out food groups, or I'd, do all these different things. But still, it was unpredictable, and you didn't know what was going on. And I can remember at one point, my ex and I were very friendly, by the way. But I remember at one point, Rich and I having a conversation in the kitchen before we got married. And everybody, I think, listening to this can appreciate this. It turned into a competition of who was the most tired, and no one wins. No one wins that competition because, oh yeah, I'm really tired. Oh yeah, I did that last night. Yeah, well, I'm out again tomorrow. I've got to take this. Oh yeah. Like no one wins who is the most tired, and the relationship especially does not win. I mean, that is obviously really difficult, but it does become this sort of like almost human doing badge of honor. I think there is a period of life when, you are maybe not a senior, so you haven't got as much autonomy. And this is obviously before lockdowns and genuine flexible working and all these sorts of things. But I worked in construction and property. That was my background, which was very, very male dominated. It was way before #MeToo. And again, I'm not sitting here going, boo-hoo, poor me. I had a lot of good opportunities and, I worked hard and I was rewarded in certain ways. However, and it was a choice of mine, I repressed and locked away my vulnerability from being in a male-dominated industry, and to the point where I was so locked down. I mean, I left that industry when I was sort of just coming up for 30. I'm 41 now. And it has taken me years to get to the point where I could do that check-in with you. Has taken me years to get to a place of even embracing my femininity, to step into that. I masked and armored so deeply. I buried my vulnerability so far back to be able to be in that world, just to be able to be in it, to exist. And I certainly wasn't living. And I just want to tell you this, it's the most amazing metaphor. I love this story. It's cruel, though. I'm just going to put it out there. It's not a nice example, but it's a very, it really hits the core. So there was an experiment that was done in the early 1800s in Paris, and it was Louis Pasteur, who was a scientist of the time. And what they did, these experimenting in this lab, they get this huge pot of boiling water, and they get a frog, and they pop the frog in the boiling water. And what does the frog do?
Not for me, I'm out of here.
He goes, exactly, it's boiling, this is awful, no thank you, pings straight out, hops off somewhere around the lab. Anyway, experimenters aren't done. So they turn the water off, cools right down to room temperature. So it's a lovely, cool, big pot of water. Get the frog back, or a new one. And they go and pop it back in the water, which is now cool. What does the frog do this time?
Get in.
Yeah.
Like it's okay.
Yeah, it's an amphibious creature. It's having a great time. It's doing its backstroke. It's like, oh, this is gorgeous, nice and cool water. Love it. But they weren't done. So what the experimenters did this time was they turned that big pot of boiling water up 1 degree at a time until slowly, finally, that water hit boiling point again. What do you think the frog did this time?
Until, stayed in it until boiling point, and then probably died. Exactly
that. The frog kept swimming. It adapted to its situation. It boiled to death because ultimately, with every degree going up slowly, it adapted and died. And that is what I think happened. In what way, in what areas of your life and people listening are they a boiling frog right now? Where are we adapting to the point that we've become so numb to our environment that if you were to put someone in a fresh, it would be so painful and so agonizing you couldn't tolerate it. But you've been adapting and changing just even 1 degree at a time to tolerate something that is taking you away and hurting you and probably killing you in some ways. And that is absolutely my burnout, and that is absolutely my life at that point. And that is absolutely what I see. And honestly, in some ways, I'm probably the boiling frog at points in my life now. But thankfully, as we spoke about earlier, I have enough warning lights on my dashboard to go, right, and what do I need to do about it? But that story and the boiling frog, and whenever I speak about it and you see people and, you know, you and I going now, like it's we've been there and it's horribly painful, but you can adapt.
It hits home, like that experiment, in a really different way, because I think so many of us can relate to it and can identify. And yeah, for us, we can look back at corporate and be like, that's probably it. But two things you said that was so powerful for me. One, in terms of, yes, you can still identify those moments. And being on the other side of that, I just want to say thank you, because it also validates how I feel, but also that it's okay, you catch it a lot earlier. And sometimes I find with my clients, they will say to me, Amira, I don't want this to happen anymore. I want this to stop. And we'll get onto the inner critic and that negative self-talk. And they will say to me, and this is even after months of working together, Amira, like, I just want this to stop. And I'm like, okay, but that's not our goal, right? The goal is that you catch it before it spirals, before you ignore those warning lights. And the other thing that, for me, I think is so powerful, when you talk about your vulnerability and being able to get to the stage you're at now, to do that open share. You didn't know I was going to ask that, okay? I knew that, and I've been sitting on that for a while. And I've played that out a few times in my head. And yesterday in my head it went way better, but still, we are where we are. But the point of that is that I still had to really build myself up. I knew you would probably reverse it onto me. And find my answer today is massively authentically and where I am, and it isn't actually anything to do with how I felt yesterday, because that check-in was different. But the point is, I still had to hype myself up for it. So just hearing in terms of your journey and actually being able to get to that space, and I always say, like, the work's never done. Hey, like, we're always evolving, and it shows up in different ways, and you learn different tools at that stage of your life. So just thought that was important to highlight, and it really validated how I felt. So thank you, because I still had to hype myself up for that.
Yeah, and you know, this is you and I doing this in a safe environment, in a studio setting, and we kind of knew we were going to have a conversation about this today. So for anyone listening and watching, just seeing that, you know, it's a bit crunchy and a bit, you know, like, it's good, but it's also still a bit hard, and it's still, you know, we're unconditioning ourselves to do something, you know, still, as you say, like taking layers off. There are still certain settings or environments that you know, it's more difficult than others. And why is it easier to say deeply vulnerable things to someone that's more of a stranger than it is to look in the eyes of someone, a friend or a partner? You know, it's just sort of understanding that it's doesn't always feel natural, but when you do it, you know, the water cools down for sure.
Oh my gosh, definitely. And has such a different impact on how you live life as well, and the choices that you make. A few things I'm going to kind of unpick with you. First of all, because this is such a key part of where we go with this, and actually how we make those changes, where we tap into our vulnerability. In your words, for anybody that is hearing this for the first time, can you explain to us this voice inside our head, this inner critic, what it's doing, why it's there, how sometimes it can be unhelpful? I think for my community and anyone listening, I always refer to it as like your negative self-talk or your chatter, right? So I'm just kind of putting that out there in case anyone's heard me talk about it in a different way. Yep,
sure, certainly. So the inner critic, which is how I would reference it, goes by a myriad of names. So negative self-talk, chatter, the saboteur, imposter syndrome, the ego, so the gremlin, the devil on your shoulder, you know, all of these things are the voice that we have inside. So in my view, and I have a bit of a maverick sort of view on this and position on this, which I'm sort of championing, is that your inner critic is a very well-meaning friend, but it's got it a bit wrong. So it's a bit unskillful, but what it's trying to do is good. So if we go back to when I was talking about, as humans, our biggest fear is rejection, because obviously if we're outside of the group, then our survival is limited. So your inner critic, which has been with you for how long?
My whole life.
Right, yeah. So it's lived with us a really, really, really long time, right? It knows us super well. What it does is we get into situations, new, outside of the comfort zone, unknown, okay? And the inner critic goes, oh, no, don't do that. Don't say that. No. Oh, do you remember what happened when you were 7 and you didn't win that race at school and that was really disappointing? Or, oh no, do you remember when that person wrote that mean thing about you on Instagram, that one person, you know? Or like, oh, no. What if that person in the supermarket on Friday gives you a dirty look, or, you know, whatever it is? Don't do that. No. Do something you've done before instead. So your inner critic is desperately trying to keep you safe the only way it knows how. And it's, but the way it knows how is to do what you've always done before. So it's trying to keep you in this comfort zone. So when you are breaking out of your comfort zone, this is the paradox, your inner critic often gets a lot louder. So if we were going to go and do a bungee jump now, if you're like, another surprise, we're going to like be super vulnerable and bungee jump, I'd be like, oh, okay. You know, but you know,
thank you.
yeah, okay, thank you.
Out at that point.
Good. But our inner critics would be like, what are you doing? What are you doing? This is dangerous. You know, and understandably, because we're about to do something huge and jump off a building or whatever and really push out of so many comfort zones all at once. But having done that, we can look back at that as part of our journey and go, do you remember when we did that brave thing? So, but this is, you know, anything, changing a job, having a vulnerable conversation, saying something you've never said before to somebody, any of those things, your inner critic is going to start really going, okay? So for any of your listeners that are like, but why is it now? Why is it that I'm on the precipice of making a change that I really want and I inherently know this is something that I need, but why now am I struggling more than ever with this negative self-talk, the inner critic? Because it's trying to keep you safe. It desperately does not want for you to make a fool of yourself, fail, be judged, and be rejected. It wants to keep you connected. Now, obviously, we don't want to listen to that. So I'm saying don't pay it any heed. You know, it's not, unless you are literally standing on the edge of a building thinking about doing a bungee jump, then fair dues, you know. But if you're changing job, if you're making a choice, if you're having a difficult conversation, whatever it might be where your inner critic is acting up, one of the things that we can do is say, hey, listen, thank you. Thank you. I get it. You're trying to keep me safe. Thank you. You've been with me all my life. But you know what? We've done this, 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 and this hard thing. And name a few things, you know. We did that time. We did that race. We had that conversation. It went really well. We did that new thing once, and that was good too. And you kind of almost give it evidence, like a dossier of the things that you did do really well, and you thank it. And honestly, you will feel it lower. You will feel your ego lower, your inner critic lower. And it's a bit like, oh, okay. And you can even really quiet yourself down if you're doing meditation or however you're accessing yourself, and you can ask it, okay, what is it that you need from me? What is it that you're worried about? What is it that you're afraid of? And you can then answer that question. I do this exercise with my clients. I do one where we literally go into communication with the inner critic. We put it in front and we talk about it and we understand, like, you know, why are you doing these things? A lot of health related issues. I have some clients where we literally talked parts of their body. You know, fertility maybe is one, or injury, something like that. You know, why is this happening? And every single time, the answer is the same. I am trying to protect you. I am trying to keep you safe. The answer of what you need to do might be different. One of my athletes was to be much more aggressive in what they're doing and to be, you know, really assertive and take charge. Like, I'm being so negative with you because you're not taking charge enough. Someone else, it's because you're not listening, you're not nurturing, you're not caring. So I'm trying to do these things to stop you, to make you listen and face up to stuff. So yes, my whole MO on this is that because I think we have all these books and tools and people are like, crush negative self-talk, bash your inner critic, like, da-da-da. And
like, get rid of it.
Yeah,
like,
and
you can be rid of it.
Yeah, get rid of it. Yeah. Like, dude, and I'm like, I get it. I'm not saying that's not right and we don't want to listen to it. But honestly, I think most people are absolutely like, I want to swear, but I think most people are sort of like...
You can swear.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
About the authenticity.
I'm a bit of a sweary Mary, I do apologise. But I think most people are like completely screwed right now energetically. And who has got the energy to like bash your inner critic right now? Not me, I'll be honest. No. So it's like, you're like, I'm trying to make this change. I'm doing this thing. I'm whatever, making my life, putting all the pieces together. And then now you want me to like also completely control every single negative thought I have. I haven't got that in the tank, people. Sorry. So what I'd much rather do actually is be vulnerable in this space and create that, have communication with it. And actually also, like anything, let's take the Band-Aid off. Mantras, yes, doing things great. Like, I'm really not anti any of it, but I think that unless we take the Band-Aid off and address the wound, we just keep sticking stuff on, you know. So they are always there to keep you safe. When you know that, when you slow down, when you can offer it some kind of promise, integrity, partnership. When I work with a lot of my athletes, say, okay, how can we work together? That's what we do in this exercise. Right now, we're not teams. You can make your inner critic your biggest cheerleader. It is possible. And it's not that hard, honestly. It's much easier, I think, doing that, going into communication, asking it what it needs you to stop doing. What do you need me to keep doing? What do you need me to know? Then it lowers itself down. And then you can move forward in partnership from there, rather than this whole like bash, bash, bash and band-aid it up and off we go. Like anything, like us eating sugar right now to get through the afternoon. It will be all right, not our best work.
Yeah, what a powerful tool. Of course, we know you say the word communication, my buzzword, but it made me think, right, we already have the dialogue. Like, that's happening in your brain, whether you want to tune into it, whether you don't, whether you want to ignore it. So actually, it feels, hopefully, a lot more easeful to actually engage in a dialogue. And I think just the other layer of why that's so powerful as well, in terms of it helps you separate from that negative voice or from that inner critic. And I remember deeply, like, one client particularly right at the beginning of us working together truly believed that that negative voice, that inner critic, was who they were, and that fundamentally they couldn't change. And I think as well, it was probably like my first client who'd like explained it to me in that way. And they, at this point, had like completely broken, like were in tears expressing this. And it made me as well like look at it and feel it really differently. And I think the tool you've just given us as well, like, I agree in terms of like, I'm not against mantras and things like that, but I also I love talking about like a toolbox and find the tools that work for you. And sometimes as well they change in different situations. And I loved, because I was going to ask you this question, so I was so glad when you shared it with us from your athlete's perspective as well, because I wanted to say as well, in your experience when you're working with them, I know you work with like a lot of different, I was going to say athletes, but I mean in terms of sectors. Like,
yeah, different sports, yeah.
Thank you. I was like, what's the word I'm looking for? In different sports, and how much they have to like challenge it or make it a friend, and how much it shows up for them. Especially because performance, right, is at the forefront of what they do. They don't perform, i.e. they don't get paid, or they don't get that bonus. And usually it's for millions of people watching. They don't get to just fail in private.
Yeah, you get instant feedback. And if I use golf as an example, I work quite extensively in golf and with golfers. You're the person, so you may have a team around you, and I may be on your team, but you're the one stood there performing. So there's a huge amount of pressure. And if we take that into corporate, you may have the team around you, but perhaps you're the person delivering the presentation. So there's performance anxiety. And then behind that, there's actually a social phobia in both. So this is one of my mentors who I love. And actually I was re-listening some tapes the other day for I was doing some stuff myself, like some writing. And I was like, I haven't talked about this for ages, but it's so helpful because people can come to me for EMDR. We may talk about this trauma, and I can treat phobias, things like a spider. And we're kind of like, people go, I'm afraid of spiders, and we'll go, oh yeah, so is my auntie or whoever, or I don't like them or whatever. And that's kind of a bit more socially acceptable. And if you said to me, I'm really afraid of flying, I would say, okay, and people talk about that. But it's not. Anxiety is something really specific. It would be something within the entire flight or trip to the airport or whole thing that you're anxious about. Is it that you're anxious when you're strapped in and you can't move? Like I heard a story from someone that they've become very anxious about needing to go to the bathroom, for example, and not being able to get up to go. Now, the anxiety behind that is the humiliation of what could happen to them. Public speaking. It's not performance anxiety. You have a social phobia about humiliating yourself in public. I might forget my words. I might say something stupid. People may laugh at me. Judged, rejected. Here we go. Yeah. Sports. You're performing on the world stage. Performance anxiety. Yeah, I'm anxious that my swing's not where it should be, or my short game, or whatever it might be. But the social phobia of humiliating myself, letting people down, being watched on television, not being where I should be, where people are putting me in the figures or whatever it might be, in the rankings. Or there's a very different thing between anxiety and a social phobia, and I think it's quite liberating when you know that. Anxiety is incredibly specific. It's a very specific point or thing. Social phobia is something a bit more generalized, but it's inherently about humiliation, and that's where your self-compassion comes in.
I just love the distinction, and even as well, you using the example of flying, because my mum actually won't fly. She hasn't for probably 15 years maybe. And slightly different because she's claustrophobic, very badly claustrophobic. But actually being able to pinpoint, okay, well, there's actually probably one thing that like you're actually anxious about, and then is it fair to say you then kind of broad brush the whole entire experience of like, I'm anxious about flying? But actually, when you said as well, being strapped in, and it could be that it's the fear of not being able to get off. And for her, it just really rang true because actually, especially around the claustrophobic, it's about being kind of hemmed in and closed in. And if she wants to open the door, she can't get off.
And it could be that, and obviously I'd need to speak to her and have some time with her, or or it could also be then what would happen based on the fact she can't get out, maybe the real anxiety or the phobia is the humiliation she would feel if she had a panic attack or lost control from being in an enclosed space. So there are two things that can be the same at once. But I think it's very, there's an anxiety, which is the specific point. I don't want to be, it's a point where the door closes and I can't get out. The social phobia is the humiliation I fear or may feel if I got very upset or was unwell or whatever, had a panic attack on the back of this. So when you understand that, you're like, God, well, of course, and shame lives in the place of humiliation. And the only cure for shame is self-compassion. It's the only way you can cure shame. So this is something that I think, again, for everyone to know when a lot of people are afraid of public speaking. Yeah. You'll have that so much with what you do. And I have people come to me for treatment, EMDR, which is reprogramming your mind for that. But it's, again, they say I've got performance anxiety. You get there, it's a social phobia about humiliation. So I think having that and understanding that we can take that on as shame and we lock it into our system as something shameful from something in our past. And then the only cure for that is self-compassion.
I don't know if we talk about that enough, because even when you said it, like the difference, I use mum as an example, and so rightly so when you're like, I haven't spoken to her. But it's just beautiful that you were able to just distinguish, on the very few facts I gave you. But rightly so when you then said, well, also there could be a social phobia element of it. And 100%, I'm going to say it's there 100% right, but that's because I've lived with her for most of my life. But in terms of like if she blacked out and how that would humiliate her, and you don't know this, but it's happened to her. So there's definitely an element of that. And that kicks in for her because it's, what if that happens again?
Yes.
What if that happens again in public? And she doesn't have it if it happened at home. And this is kind of talking a while ago, but it really, really rang true. And I just think, wow, like how many of us don't know that and are able to distinguish between the two?
This might be helpful for me to talk a little bit about what happens to your mind on trauma. Because it's quite a good segue if you'd like that. So we'll go back into system as well. So it's really important for people to I want to normalise people's experience of trauma, because you hear about trauma and you hear about PTSD and you think, well, I haven't been to war, so I can't have it. It's almost like I don't deserve to have trauma. Like I haven't done anything brave enough, scary enough, haven't been in a big enough accident. And obviously you look at the news and you put things into context and you're like, well, no, I have not done those things. So, but I've certainly had PTSD in a number of things that happened in my life. I'm certainly not ashamed to say, and I'm happy to share. Like I went to go and have EMDR done on myself, and I'll talk a bit more about it after going to court as part of my divorce proceedings from the barrister on the other side. It was so violent, the language and how he approached it. It was so awful that I could feel it in my system. And it's part of a game, and rationally I know all of that. Yes. Rationally I know it's an act, a game, whatever. I had my team around me. I knew I wasn't physically in danger. However, I also knew that it started to affect how I was living my life. And this is the thing with trauma. Your mum flying. She's blacked out. She's not going to do it. She's going to start affecting her life, probably in other ways and other places she may go. This is the impact that trauma has. Now, thankfully for me, so what happened was I had a horrible dream. It was just so awful what had happened. And then I went to the supermarket, I don't know, a couple of days later, and whatever, was waiting to park and some person behind me was getting quite agitated. And I got panicked and drove off, and I thought, right, okay, I know that that's from that event is triggering this, is making me panic. I need to go and get it sorted out. Now that's me with the tools, with the knowledge, and also knowing where to go and get it done. And I got it sorted out there and then. Yes. But so many people are walking around with trauma. And that was just some guy shouting in my face through a computer screen, by the way. It was through Zoom. But it was that bad and it affected me that much. And obviously the whole situation's very heightened and, I'm in fight or flight anyway. And that is something that really was about to start affecting I'd then start getting home deliveries for food, or I would go to the supermarket out of hours, or then I probably wouldn't start going, or maybe I'd avoid the shops, or, if any guy started getting remotely agitated, I'd be reactivated. It's just really important that people know this. So trauma works, if we talk about it in this context here, you and I, if a great big tiger came jumping into this room and is like gnashing and snarling and going for us, you and I are both going to enter fight or flight. Now there's fight, flight, freeze, and the lesser known flop and fawn. So fight, obviously you decide to get up and bash it with the mic. Flight, I'm running out the door. Freeze, we're both just so paralyzed by fear that we stop. Flop, fairly obvious, pass out. Fawn, try and placate it. There, nice kitty. Here you go, So that's more common in narcissistic relationships and gaslighting, the fawn. Or maybe domestic violence as well, because you're in danger, but your system will take over and try and placate the predator to keep you safe. The thing that I want to say about trauma and your responses is we didn't get to pick. So it wasn't like we got presented with the options. Which one do you fancy?
Yes.
It is inherently happens, and it goes really quickly. Your system takes it on. And this is how. The threats in the system, your prefrontal cortex, the front area of your brain, which also includes your Broca's area for language, offline, gone, not needed. We don't need dates and times right now. We don't need to think about our Spanish lessons. We need to literally survive. So all of the brain has gone into your amygdala, your limbic system, the animal brain area. Great. That is where your trauma responses live. Fight, flight, freeze, flop and fawn. So you have not rationally in any way or cognitively selected your response. You've gone straight into survival, truly into this part of your brain. So it's taken over and it's gone much quicker. So then the situation happens. I don't know, whatever, the tiger goes, oh, neither of you two, not that interesting, and off it goes. And we go, whew. And we both had different responses, we both had different experiences. We leave today, all was fine. Turns out he, it was all well and good, and we go about our daily business. Now, what was happening when your prefrontal cortex was shut off? Your brain was tagging. So even though it wasn't here, it was tagging the smell of my perfume. It tagged that plant over there in my eye line. It tagged something over here that you can see. So we then go about our day, and in 6 months later, 10 months later, you get a whiff of my perfume on the tube, you go into a trauma response, and you don't know why. You have a panic attack. I'm walking around and I see a colour there or something like your top, and I'm immediately reactivated. Maybe a different trauma response to before, but it's there and it exists and it's gone into your system. So when people have a panic attack, blacked out, that, the thing that happened to me, it doesn't necessarily manifest itself in the same way how it's going to come out, but it starts coming out, trauma. And then what happens is, and this is where I try and do my work, when you notice that you start living your life differently. If we look at your lovely mum, like she's not living parts of her life because she's obviously closing herself off to try and manage it.
Yes.
I get that. And it's shame. You feel alone. So you think you're the only one, you feel isolated. It's like being in a cave and you're looking out, but you're the only one in there. And so what you do is, because you feel out of control and because it can start coming in different environments, it might not just be the plane, it might also be a certain store or shop or someone's house, or I don't feel comfortable in certain settings. I don't want to be in a car with lots of people, these sorts of things. You then just start almost closing things off, just hoping that you can find out which one it might be. And that's when you stop living your life. So that's when trauma has really taken a hold of you. And there's a key with PTSD, which is that anything after 3 months is considered post-traumatic. Anything within 3 months is recent traumatic. So as a collective, we have PTSD from lockdown, say, from that disconnection from some of the news. So as a collective, we'd be suffering from that. That's obviously way after 3 months right now. But yeah, anything that's happening to you within 3 months, you have a lot more sort of recognition for the individual elements of. We'd know exactly when it came in, what time. So we'd have a lot of like detail. After 3 months, what happens is things that could be related to the event, but maybe didn't happen to us at all, can get sucked in. So let's say you were at home in 6 months' time watching the news with your boyfriend and something comes on about a tiger. That can reactivate you. And it can go into the experience, even though it wasn't yours, if that makes sense. So it's like a magnet. It starts sucking stuff in. So even though it wasn't related to that event that caused the trauma, it's like this magnet that brings things together. And again, then we can start changing how we live our life. So people listening to this will be like, oh, but I haven't had trauma. Let me tell you, yes, you have. And it can be, and trauma is also something that you have witnessed Quite often it doesn't have to be something that happened to you directly, but it's any time that you have, been out of control, felt out of control, and then because we don't understand it, and like I say, it can start coming out in different ways, and we start then maybe not taking the tube. I'm just going to walk because I prefer the walk.
Yes.
Do you? Or is it because you're afraid of something, or you're avoiding certain places, or, things like that? Or I just don't like that. I don't do that. If that's true, fine. But if it's not because you're taking yourself out of life, we need to look at that very differently. And that's sort of where I feel very passionately, because I think it's not understood. I think it's not normalized. And I don't want anyone living less of their own life for fear of something that, can be worked around, and just have the understanding of it.
I am smiling so much because I really wanted you to hit home on this point. You didn't know how much I wanted you to do it, and you did. But it's also because you said, if you think you're not walking around with trauma, I can promise you are. And I spent most of my life being that person. And only probably in the last few years, I was like, oh, okay, I'll swallow that one. And also it allows you to, to acknowledge and, like you say, not avoid or not do something differently or change your life around it. And I do think that there is such a misconception that trauma is big. And for me, I always used to associate it with some level of like abuse. And that I had a great life. I had a house over my head. I had 2 parents. I was fine. And actually, I really had to break that down. And I think that we associate so much with like those big things, and it's those moments. And even you describing your situation with that barrister and how you took that on, and it being over Zoom, and actually that impacted you. And that you had the tools to then connect, right?
Thank goodness. But if I didn't, and I really want to normalise this for people listening, and I have got all the tools. I knew I was going into an adversarial situation. I mean, I had a crystal in my bra, right?
I'm sorry for that.
I had all the stuff. I had I had this thing down the middle of my bra. I had like stuff everywhere. I was really, doing all the things. I was grounding and protecting myself. Like I knew it wasn't going to be a nice day out. So I knew that. I wasn't like I was surprised by honestly the violence of the experience and just how kind of unbelievable it was. And my team were like, that's really bad. And, it shouldn't have happened. And, but still, as I say, I have the tools, the community, I knew where to go. I've got the most amazing therapist for myself. So I knew exactly where to go. I knew what I needed. And I felt as soon as it happened in that, in that supermarket car park, I felt the second that it happened, okay, I know what this is from. I need to go and get this sorted out. So, but thank goodness that I have that. A lot of people don't. And then they end up, as I say, sort of making choices, or the inner critic has this role then of, oh, do you really want to go and do that today? Oh, do you really want to go and see that person? Are you sure? Why don't we just stay here? No, don't go on that trip. Don't go out with those people. Don't do this thing. Why don't we just stay here? Because then we're safe.
That summed up so much. And I feel beautifully kind of full circled where we even started the conversation. And I love as well that you've taken it a step further as well, because I do think we hear a lot about, trauma responses in terms of your fight, flight or freeze. Actually, flop and fauna, I think, I would say from my experience, the lesser known ones. It's
quite new, even in our circles in trauma informed. It's a fairly new sort of way to look at it and put some attention on it, yeah.
And I just think that when you first of all have the acknowledgement that most of us are walking around with some level of trauma, and that it doesn't have to be, as I always used to describe it or used to envisage it, that it has to be something so terrible and so detrimental that everybody would think it's trauma. And like you said as well, that actually is so relative. It's how you've taken something on. And actually I listened to one of your other podcasts, and you shared a story in terms of, I think it was in your early 20s, and you're living in Putney. And I mean, I'm going to paraphrase, so please feel free to actually correct the story. And coming in late from a night out, you'd heard a noise, you thought it was the cat, and actually it turned out that somebody was at your window trying to break in. And actually, how years later you came back full circle to that moment and were able to then release it. But I don't think we realise as well how much, one, we hold on to it. Two, I want to ask you a question, because I was going to make an assumption, but I actually want to ask it as a question. When we're walking around with this trauma and we're unaware of it and we haven't quite tapped into it yet, what's the impact it's having on our physical body?
Great question. Yeah, great question. So it can be doing all manner of things. So what it's doing is it's activating your sympathetic, your fight or flight. So your nervous system is going into activation. So the holistic psychologist, she's fantastic, Dr. Nicole LaPera, she speaks, her book is brilliant. If anyone's interested, please read it. It's great. And she says that, IBS is linked to this. And again, physiologically, it makes sense because you've gone into trauma, you maybe need to run. So it makes sense that your system would want to release things so that you're, lighter about your feet and it's not a process that you need. So yeah, it affects your body in a variety of different ways. It causes inflammation. It causes often autoimmune is linked to this now. Gabor Mate in his latest book, Myth of Normal, but all of his work talks about women have more autoimmune conditions than men and linked to trauma. So yeah, there's a huge amount in that space around the physiology as well. But I think, looking at that experience, the burglary for me, it was in my early 20s, as you said. I froze, and still now, if that man he was in front of my face when people were filming, it was there on a sash window, and I opened the curtains and he was there. I couldn't tell you what he looked like. I wouldn't know. All of that part of my brain went. Now, I felt stupid for years. How could I not remember the face of someone that was like that? But I didn't know that wasn't available to me at that time. And I froze. And I was so ashamed of freezing. And what it told me in that time was that if anything scary or difficult ever happened to me again, I was hopeless, I was helpless, and I was weak. That was the underlying limiting belief. This is what trauma does. It leaves you with an underlying limiting belief. I'm out of control. I'm not enough. I'm a failure. I'm unlovable. I'm unhealthy. I can't cope, any of these things. But mine was, I am helpless, I am hopeless, and I am weak. And I lived with that underlying limiting belief as part of my system for years. And honestly, I chose relationships from that place. I chose jobs from that place. I probably did not take on challenges because I was helpless, hopeless, and weak. So with that lens for my life, that because I had a thing that happened and I froze. So telling me that anything particularly hard in my life that might happen, that's who I am. I can't cope. And so when I understood that, and it was actually in a training room of the EMDR, because they said, pick a trauma that's like a 5. And I thought that was a 5. I didn't think that wasn't a big 10. I had some 10s and I was like, oh, that's a 5. I'll do that. And it was serendipitous because the training room setup, the window was exactly where it was in my bedroom from that time. Didn't realise that until we started doing it. So the subconscious mind always knows what it's doing, right? It pulled it in. The tagging. So my brain had obviously tagged and gone, oh, this is a great time to see. The tagging still happens, even though you might not remember it. And we're doing this process. And as part of the protocol, you do a body scan as well. And I just said, I feel like I've got this sort of thing across the back of my shoulders. And you're doing this protocol, you're tapping, and someone's obviously doing it on me. And then I felt it come into my chest and I felt it come into my throat. And I'm not a big crier, just because it doesn't tend to come out of me that way. And I burst into tears. And what it was, that was the scream that had lived inside my system for 18 years at that point that couldn't come out because I froze. It had been that scream, and that's what trauma does. It lives in your system and it couldn't come out. And then the beautiful thing with EMDR is you get to put back in what you prefer to believe about yourself instead. So you reprogram yourself. So I no longer believe in any way that I'm helpless, hopeless, or weak. I have put back in I am brave. And with my clients, I am brave, I am enough, I am loved, I'm healthy, I am capable, I am strong, I am courageous, whatever people might want to believe about themselves. And you put that back in instead. And of course, then that becomes your lens for how you see the world. But trauma creates an underlying limiting belief about yourself based on shame that you take into your system. And the only cure is self-compassion.
I love this. I'm really, really big on, in terms of, 1, understanding that we're all carrying trauma. 2, realizing as well how it lives in your body. That example, or like that actual story, in terms of you saying that was the cry that lived within me.
Oh, yeah.
18 years. Like, that hit home. I was like, okay, I need to look at myself.
And do you know what? It wasn't the only time I haven't screamed. Definitely, I knew that. That's the thing with the work is because it kind of trauma sucks stuff in like a magnet, like I said. So that was 18 years before. So obviously there were other times that, I hadn't screamed, frankly. So, and when that one came out, it wasn't just that. I knew it. That was a lot of things that had, not been able to come out of my system that needed to. And like I said, I'm a big fan of vulnerability, and it doesn't tend to come out of my eyes, my vulnerability, very often. It does sometimes. But for the next 2 days, I cried on and off non-stop, and I wasn't necessarily unhappy, but that was my system releasing the stress, releasing the issues from my tissues. That was what was coming out, and it needed to.
I love that, especially it being the release. All about it. And I guess I don't know if this is a good way for me to position it, but I guess the one thing that I think I do well with my clients is tap into whatever the pain point is, and for them, I would say more often than not it tends to come out in crying, but bear in mind it's not something they usually do. So usually they will respond with, I'm so sorry.
Yeah. Always, I'm so sorry, I don't know why I'm feeling emotional, or I'm so sorry I'm emotional today.
Yes.
Yeah.
And apologizing, and my response usually is, I'm so glad it's a release. Let the release come. And then it's about holding space for that, especially when you're not used to crying.
Yeah.
You have the narrative of like crying means I'm being weak.
Well, where does it come from? Oh, big brave girl. Oh, there's my big girl. There's my brave girl. Don't cry. Or boys don't cry. Or, where does it come? So we apologize for, like an emotion. And absolutely, I say the same thing. I'm like, please. I say, first of all, I say before we even start, there's always tissues. I'm like, look, I'm really good with emotion. Like, please, it's absolutely, everything's fine here. Because also quite often when we're doing the protocol, people can feel very sick because shame is a felt sense. Shame is I am. So if I ask you to think about something, obviously you don't need to say it, just think about anything you might feel ashamed of. It's probably going to give you the ick. It's something that's quite usually deep in your stomach, and it's a horrible feeling. So let's say
very nauseous.
Yeah.
Like that is my feeling, and I know when I have it in the pit of my stomach, it's lit, and I won't throw up, but it is nauseous. I feel sick to my stomach.
That's shame. I am. So if I messed up with my daughter, say, and I was chatting to you, like, babe, do you know what? Didn't do a great job. I snapped at her. I was rushing. I was a bit tired, or whatever, this morning. And if I said to you, did a bad job with her today, like I didn't do great at parenting. That's guilt. I didn't do. I really messed up today, babe, and I am a bad mother. I feel sick now even saying it. I am a bad parent. That's shame. I fucked up. Guilt. I am shame. And shame is this deep felt sense. And so at the beginning of sessions, I'll say, and very often I've had people retching because it's just, and very unusual things we might be working on, maybe like an actual traumatic event, like a drowning or something like that, or an accident, or it can be anything. But there's this shame, this underlying limiting belief, the I am helpless and hopeless and weak. I am a bad mother. I am not enough. I am a failure. It's this felt sense. So that's the other thing to know is that, and again, the only way you can cure this is self-compassion.
Yes. I'm smiling and I'm so grateful for like your level of vulnerability, your wisdom, your expertise. And although I'm going to pause our episode here, there is so many more things I want to explore. So I'm going to put it out to the universe. Then we'll do it in a part 2.
Love that. I would love that. So
before we end, I love to wrap up with every single guest. So I say it's a quick fire round. It's never a quick fire round. I'm fully lying at this point, okay? So first thing I want to say or ask you, what's a quote that you want to leave our listeners with, or like some piece of food for thought?
So I think based on today's conversation, I'm going to give you the quote that you get taught first of all in coach school. And it's Carl Jung, and it's what you resist persists.
You don't know this, but it's one of my favourite quotes. I just love a bit of Carl Jung. Yeah. Beautiful. A practical tip that you want to leave our listeners with that they can actually go and apply.
So breathing, I call it like control alt delete breath, so say that you're feeling panic. Let's say something I've talked about today and you recognise that actually there are some things that trigger you and you maybe feel panicky in certain spaces or places. The thing that you can always do wherever you are is breath work. There are some fantastic things online. There's one on my Instagram. There's one that Andrew Huberman does, and it's a short inhale through your nose, a long inhale, and then you do an exhale out your jaw. You do that 3 times over, you're immediately in your parasympathetic. I call it being in your pina colada zone. Like if someone tried to nick my car now, I'd be like, have the keys. Like you just, there's nothing, take it, I don't care, like it's fine. You're so sort of namaste when you're in that place. So it just checks you out of the panic. So that is something that is available. You can do it anywhere at any time. It's not obvious if you felt self-conscious, but genuinely I'd encourage anyone to do it if they have any situations where they're feeling a bit out of control.
I love that. And my last question is a book or podcast or a resource that you would love to recommend or share.
I'm a massive fan of, I listen to loads, I absorb everything. I think a really good expert generalist is Lewis Howes, The School of Greatness. And quite often he does masterclasses where they've sort of mashed up, say, 2 or 3 people. So I was listening to one the other day on relationships, and they had Esther Perel, who I fangirl about. I'm obsessed with her. And they had a couple other experts on there. So I would say anyone maybe particularly starting a journey or, looking to land in there. He's got the biggest library. Go in. I feel like he's a very big-hearted person. He seems to be doing it for the right reasons. And there's always something on there to resonate with.
Annalie, the biggest thank you for today. I am so grateful.
Oh, it's my absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.